Hi, everyone. Welcome, welcome, welcome. You are now entering into our webinar. As you come in, please know that you will be on mute, but you will be able to see the panelists as they speak. Today's webinar is called Moving Forward, Flipping How Failure to Collect Ethnic Data Erases Young Latinx from the Youth Justice Conversation. We hope that you are joining us and that you're in the right place. And if you're not, we're happy to have you because you're going to have an excellent webinar and panel discussion today. As you come in, we will be having Q&A towards the end of today's webinar. So as the webinar goes along, if you have any questions for our panelists, please feel free to put them in the chat box and we will make sure to get to those at the end of this webinar. If you have any technical issues or you're having any issues with Zoom, please feel free to send me a chat after this webinar or during the webinar, and I can help resolve that. The webinar is being recorded and the recording will be posted on JDAI Connect once this is completed. So now that we are right at the hour to start, I am going to pass this webinar over to Jessica Sandoval, who will be our moderator for today's webinar. Thanks, everyone.
Hello, everyone. On behalf of the Alianza for Youth Justice, I would like to thank you all for joining today's webinar. This webinar will present highlights of the report that was released in August by the Alianza for Youth Justice and the Latino Public Policy Institute. This report exposes how each of the 50 states across counties and institutions collect highly inconsistent and inaccurate data of Latinx youth in the youth justice system, and how inconsistent data collection methods complicate race and ethnicity tracking along the decision points and across the various institutions of the youth justice system among the 50 states. This panel will present how the lack of comprehensive Latinx ethnic data jeopardizes the ability to build a responsive youth justice system that meets the needs of thousands of Latinos, Indigenous, and Afro-Latino youth who are incarcerated and under supervision. Further, without accurate Latinx data, system stakeholders, legislators, and advocates are unable to address racial and ethnic disparities, institute healing and culturally centered care, including an effective COVID-19 response. We are grateful to be joined today by our distinguished panel of experts whom I will introduce momentarily. They will offer details from the report on the challenges of collecting data on system-impacted youth and offering a way forward so that leaders can craft viable solutions based on facts as we reopen our economy and transform failed systems. I am Jessica Sandoval, and I will serve as your moderator for today's webinar. I'm the Senior Campaign Strategist for the Unlock the Box campaign, a national campaign working to end the use of solitary confinement for all people, and I am a member of the Alianza for Youth Justice. Today, we will examine how agencies across the country and within states gather and report data on race and ethnicity inconsistently, but more importantly, that many agencies do not collect data on Latinx ethnicity. My colleagues will explain that this has not only failed to achieve any positive results, but it has contributed to creating an incomplete picture of Latinx ethnic data. We will also address that states report racial and ethnic data inconsistently across the 3 points of contact: at arrest, detention, and probation. It is critical that these agencies responsible for collecting this data act immediately to address the alarming racial disparities that persist at county, state, and federal levels. I would like now to introduce each of our panelists in the order that they will be speaking, starting with Bernie Gomez. Mr. Gomez is a program and leadership assistant at MILPA, motivating individual leadership for public advancement. Concurrently, he serves as our qualitative research intern with the Alianza for Youth Justice. As a teen, he experienced revolving cycles of addiction and criminalization. At MILPA, he works to cultivate change makers and connect to his ancestral traditions. Our next speaker, Joanna Molina, is the policy aide to Santa Clara County Board of Supervisor Dave Cortese. Ms. Molina is currently a law student and formerly system-impacted person. In her current employment as policy aide, her areas of focus include youth justice and women's policy issues. Being a formerly impacted youth, Joanna knows the importance of supporting youth of color who have navigated these systems. Francisco Villarruel is a researcher and professor at Michigan State University, affiliated with the Julian Zamora Research Institute. Francisco has dedicated his career to issues of Latinx youth involved in the youth justice systems and author of the seminal report Donde está la justicia from 2002. Marcia Rincon-Gallardo is the executive director at the Alianza for Youth Justice, and she will be our final speaker. At the Alianza, she directs the coalition's efforts to amplify visibility and advocacy of Chicanx, Indigenous, and Afro-Latinx youth to transform youth justice systems with long-term solutions rooted in cultura, comunidad, and healing. She presents nationally and implements her Olin Youth co-written curriculum locally with returning citizens to build the bench of leaders as policy advocates. As in our custom, we would like to honor our ancestors and the indigenous people of this land known as Turtle Island. For generations, we have suffered cultural erasure, oppression, and systemic racism. However, our ancestors have preserved and passed on our teachings and customs that provide us a pathway to transformative health, healing, and self-determination. We recognize traditions and indigenous practices exist and provide a reconciliation between self and true cultural identity. La cultura cura, culture cures, and leads to transformative health, healing, and agency for our people. I would like now to introduce and share our short 3-minute video that highlights the cultural erasure and invisibility of Latinx people.
As it is our custom, we want to start by honoring our ancestors, the indigenous people of this land. For generations, the Latinx people have suffered cultural erasure, oppression, and systemic racism. The description of Latinx people include indigenous, Chicanos, Chicanas, LGBTQ, Mexicanos, Afro-Latinos, boys and girls, and all our relatives across the Caribbean and Central and South America. We have been living in segregated neighborhoods divided by class and income. Our youth have been disproportionately targeted by police and funneled into the school-to-prison pipeline. We are punished and pushed out of school at an alarming rate. At this stage of our life, we are exploring our environment, community, independence, searching for our identity. However, the reality is our youth must also navigate the social and racial inequities that are embedded in this white supremacist system. The system for decades has ensured Latinx youth remain invisible. From the moment there is police contact to court adjudication and ultimately upon entering and being released from youth prisons. This juvenile injustice system does not recognize race, ethnicity via data. The collaboration by La Alianza for Youth Justice and UCLA Latino Policy and Politics Initiative exposes a lack of uniformity in reporting race and ethnicity. The number of Latinx youth in the juvenile injustice system is blurred. Quantitative and qualitative research shows Latinx youth are not consistently counted as Latinx youth, but instead are categorized as Black or white. No proper census is being provided to consistently know how many Latinx youth are in the system. Therefore, we are unable to advocate for appropriate and relevant resources to uplift the Latinx youth community that is system impacted. The data presented in this report is alarming. There is no uniformity in the system's policies across the states. Our elders have done this research, the presentations, spent countless hours writing reports and advocated for systemic change. Yet 20 years later, we find nothing has evolved. system must count Latinx youth as Latinx youth. For further information, connect with the Alianza's website and social media. Get involved. Aquí estamos y no nos vamos. We will defend our youth and continue the fight to defund, dismantle, and end youth incarceration.
Bernie, I'd like to have you take it away from here.
All right, thank you for that. Yes, Tlapaloa Kuali Tlanesi, Ewa Kuali Treatlok, Inoshime. Saludos, buenos días, and buenas tardes a todos. Greetings, good morning, and good afternoon to you all. To my esteemed panelists, thank you for your hard work. And I start that way because I want to bring my totality to this conversation. My name is Bernie Gomez. I am a father, a son, a brother, but most importantly, I am visible. As a formerly incarcerated individual who identifies as a Chicano Indígena, I can tell you the Latinx community is a rich and beautiful mixture of cultures, traditions, and histories. The one thing we have in common is we share the same plight. We are still entrenched in segregated, under-resourced neighborhoods, campos, barrios, projects, divided by class and income. We as the Latinx continue to suffer from systemic oppression, racism, the many structural inequities that allow for the over-policing of our communities to go unchecked. The juvenile justice system continues to target and profile our youth on the basis of skin tone, language, and gender. We are cast onto a black and white binary system that continues to further erase the identity of the already marginalized. Our Latinx youth trapped in the system are overrepresented and undercounted, inflating that black and white binary system. The system expects us to fail and continue to perpetuate the predetermined cycles of poverty and invisibility, of internalized hopelessness, hate, and racism. We are made to believe this is all we are worth, that this is normal. We are subjected to under-resourced third-rate schools and funneled right into first-class prisons. It is imperative for the leadership to understand that our kids are being exploited by the system for wages and benefits. This might sound absurd to you, but this is our reality. Our young people are being made invisible, hidden behind inaccurate data reporting. This transgression continues to leave us out of the conversations of where and how resources should be distributed and utilized. The system continues to overlook the Latinx communities where these oppressive policies are over-policed and the high rate of arrest and transfer to juvenile halls are met by quotas. Yet nothing is being done to remedy the root causes of such strife in our cities and communities. This report has highlighted facts of inconsistent reporting in the juvenile justice system across points of contact. Our youth across the country tell the same story. I can relate to my young brothers and sisters. Our children's struggle to survive must not be hidden behind inaccurate data, as this only allows to mask our lived experience. That is why we need a concise accounting of the Latinx population in the juvenile system. We can no longer be binded to practices that do not relate to our specific cultural needs. Our youth deserve to be uplifted for who they are. Our system-impacted communities must be allowed to heal from the intergenerational trauma and dream of a brighter future where health and well-being are uplifted through community-based solutions. And I say that much now, and I'll pass it on to my next panelist. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Bernie. And Joanna, you'll be next.
Hi, everyone. My name is Joanna Molina. I am here as a young Latina and formerly incarcerated young adult. I can attest to the structural racism in the youth justice system and the importance of being recognized for who I am. For when you validate my color and my culture, you recognize the traumatic and adverse experiences that got me into the system and the transformative policy changes needed in the system with community-based approaches to offer our youth in order to have them exit the system successfully. Being a Latinx youth, you might need to acknowledge that I am first generation in this country, meaning I might have had to grow up faster than most youth. It's a possibility that my mother was undocumented and had to resort to working in low-paying jobs that are not enough to make ends meet, especially in the state of California. In my current county position, I can see the juvenile hall and the county jail from my office. And really the only difference between me and those youth and young adults is that I had many mentors who advocated for me. And acknowledged the strong brown woman that I am, and did not force me to assimilate, allowing me to show up fully. For us who are involved in the policy aspect of the work and get access to see the data and the racial disparities in the juvenile justice system, we know the urgency and the gaps in the data. It is essential that we count Latinx youth and Latinx and as Latinx and not as white or other, and that we have access to the same data the system sees so that we can be included in the youth justice discussions, offering up recommendations of policy changes proven to reduce youth in the system while showing policymakers how mass incarceration is affecting the Latinx community specifically. Counting Latinx youth as white are ways for the different government systems to ignore our youth and minimize the severity of the racial disparities in our criminal justice systems. For decades, Chicano and Latinx youth have been fighting for justice and liberation in a country that has been our home before it was the United States. It is disappointing that it has taken states this long to acknowledge our existence in these racist and oppressive systems. Together, we need to ensure these systems shift from taking a punitive approach when dealing with our Latinx youth and understand the complex traumas and adversities these youth experience that bring them into the systems that only further traumatize these youth. Thank you.
Thank you, Joanna. And now I'm going to ask Francisco to share his comments. Thank you.
So before diving into the comments, I want to shout out to both Joanna and Bernie. We give power to the words of this report. It's been a long journey for many of us who have tried to address this issue historically. This report reviewed publicly available data set to create yet another foundational base of how Latinx youth are counted and are not counted in this nation, in our youth justice systems, with a particular focus on data from the last 5 years. As was previously mentioned, we focused on 3 data points: arrest, detention, and probation. We acknowledge that this does not address all the points of contact in the justice system, but as we began to examine data from all 50 states, there was a realization that these 3 points of contact were the most consistently reported points of contact across the country. It underscores the need for states to dig deeper and to become more consistent, because these are just 3 of the points of contact. Specifically, we examined 121 publicly available agency reports to evaluate what type of racial and/or ethnic data each agency collected and reported. The overall general findings are not altogether surprising. There was widespread variance across states. The publication timelines and frequency were not uniform across states, and there was noted concerns about the transparency and accountability of data that were reported across states. Upon completion of the 50-state analysis, we then engaged 22 justice agencies across the 11 most populous states in the United States. These were disseminated electronically to responsible agencies and heads. We focused on a few key questions. What are the racial and ethnic categories used by state agencies? What is unique in their approaches? And what were missing from their numbers? Did these agencies report numbers for Latinos? Did the targeted agencies conflate race and ethnicity? Did targeted agencies disaggregate race from ethnic categories? And did targeted agencies include a multiracial category? Part of the reason of this importance is that we have to understand that Latinx continues to be overrepresented at multiple points in the justice system. Yet federal data reveals that the second largest ethnic demographic group in the United States and the largest ethnic group of those under the age of 25 are Latinx. So the lack of reliable data obscures our approaches to intervention and prevention. Despite decreases in the uniform crime reports, Latinx youth have seen increases over the last 2 decades in their involvement in juvenile justice systems. Moreover, the 2018 JDAI reauthorization mandates uniform federal collection data methods for race and ethnic data. Yet findings from this report again underscore that different methodologies exist between and within states, and that there are inconsistencies that conflate the numbers. The lack of consistent data collection approach jeopardizes the accuracy of population-level data needed to ensure the fidelity of evidence-based approaches, funding priorities to provide culturally relevant community-based services, and obscures the numbers of Latinx youth that are system impacted. So let me just highlight a couple of key points from the data. There is no accurate ethnic or racial data collection practice at the federal level. As a consequence, most states reported black and white binary differences, and in some instances, states would combine racial and categories such as combining Asian and Pacific Islander and Native Hawaiian into a single category. Similar trends were seen for Latinx. There were also inconsistent racial and ethnic data collection practices at the state level. Approximately 76% of the states reported Latinx ethnic data for systems impacted youth, yet the remaining reports reported racial information that conflated race and ethnicity data by listing ethnicity as a racial category instead of its own identifying category. Moreover, it was more uncommon for states not to disaggregate, so it was impossible to understand whether the ethnic youth that were involved were of Mexican descent, Colombian, Dominican, Peruvian, etc. It's a heterogeneous category that represents 25 different nations across the Latin Americas. When we look at the most populous 11 states, here are where some of the most important variants in data collection approaches underscore the need to systematically rethink what we are doing. We were unable to locate publicly available reports for agencies that were responsible for collecting and reporting contact points by both race and ethnicity. Some agency reports did not include racial and ethnic demographic information for contact points. 42% of the states did not report racial or ethnic data for arrests. 30% of the states did not report data for detention. 52% of the states did not have probation data or a report that provided both racial and ethnic data. And so what we want to underscore here today is that if we wish to really change the approaches to which we can serve Latinx communities, the fastest growing youth population in our nation, we need to be better sensitive to collecting data that is consistent across states and that is accurate.
Thank you, Francisco. And now I'd like to have Marcia bring us home on all of these key points of the report. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Jessica. And I'm seeing some of the questions starting to jump in, so I'm going to encourage folks after I present. Of course, you know, Jessica and Shivante already said we will be doing Q&A right after this. I want to thank also our esteemed panelists and then all the people that made it possible for us to be here today. It's been a long time for us coming to this point where we can actually do this webinar. And then in August, we were just elated to be able to even release the report. And more importantly than anything, it's a call to action. Straight up, it's a call to action. But I have a couple of points that I want to make before we get to that. We know that the general US population is 18% Latinx, making them the nation's largest ethnic group. The Latinx youth population has increased by 158% between 1990 and 2018. Today, Latinx youth represent 25%, or about 8.3 million of the total US youth population between ages of 10 to 17. This long overdue report that to a certain extent reiterates what was authored in 2002, the report Donde está la Justicia, authored by our esteemed colega Chico, is literally 20 years old, provides a human face to the compelling research findings of the discrepancies on how the 50 states and District of Columbia do and do not count our diverse population. You heard from our very youth who was directly impacted how not acknowledging one's identity negatively impacts and misses huge opportunities for our youth to exit the system successfully. We have heard this from various Latinx youth directly impacted across the country through our storytelling collection, where you will see some of these stories listed on our website. We believe that collecting the data has consequence. Data matters because it impacts policy. Every state and county must collect ethnic and racial data so that all people are counted and considered when developing policy. As has been stated in this report, there is difficulty calculating an accurate population count of Latinx youth across the youth and adult justice systems. In fact, Chicanx, Indigenous, Afro-Latinos, Hispanic, brown girls, boys, and gender-expansive youth, however it is that our youth self-identify, from the limited research and data that exists, face racial and ethnic inequities. The research is bountiful on that. And their invisibility impacts their exit from these racially disparate systems. As we manifest a society without youth in cages, our hope is that we can renew our focus on local and state JDAI sites and then also non-JDAI sites to evaluate what exactly in their information systems need to change, improve, and be upgraded to collect ethnic and race data for all youth, boys, girls, gender expansive, queer, and trans youth. For example, from a September 23rd article in JDAI Connect titled "Growing Numbers of Latino and Native Youth in Juvenile Detention Buck Trend," in fact, this trend would not have been uncovered without the breakdown of race and ethnicity. The article reads, in June and July, among jurisdictions that provided information disaggregated by race and ethnicity, white youth continued to be released from detention faster than youth of color. The gap favoring white youth has grown since before the pandemic began in February, particularly compared with Latino and Native American youth. In July, the release rate was 61% among white youth compared with 55%, a drop among Black youth. The rate further dropped at 52% for Latino youth, was worse still among Native American youth at 50%. For those of us who have worked or work in local youth justice institutions, the unpacking and dive into why is this happening and how can this be reversed, where Latinx and Native American youth can be released at the same rates as whites, cannot occur without the accurate and broad data collection broken down by race, ethnicity, and SOGI that we recommend as the norm. And so we have 6 recommendations as part of our call to action. 1, directly impacted youth, families, and community with the justice system and its agencies must co-determine a common ethnic terminology that will be accepted for data collection use by agencies, institutions, and systems. For example, using the US Census guidelines tested by the Census Bureau as the most accurate methodology for capturing race and ethnicity. Now, it wasn't for this census count, given that the Trump administration chose not to follow the much tested and recommended practice that the US Census Bureau had directed. Instead, we did the previous. At this point, whether ethnicity and race are asked in separate questions or under a combined question, respondents should have the option to respond to multiple categories to self-identify. 2, Congress to authorize Federal Department of Justice and the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention to identify a uniformed racial and ethnic data collection strategy across the entire youth justice spectrum to ensure consistency when reporting on all points of contact. It is imperative that this is mandated at the state level. In the same way that JDAI could not continue just at county levels, we are saying this really needs to start at the state level so that cross-jurisdictional agencies and systems improve their data collection and reporting practices. 3, county and state level justice system authorize as standard protocol that youth self-identify versus their identity being selected by system staff. Hands down, all our young people have said this over and over again. Give me the option to self-identify. Okay, number 4, county and state level government justice systems must make public with full access to reporting trends across all decision points of the justice systems, their data, establishing transparent racial, ethnic, and SOGI data collection methodology. 5, local, state, and national movement organizations and networks must build strategy for Congress to appropriate funding for a model pilot program administered possibly by a national Latino-based organization to develop, implement a unified standard model of accurate racial data selection in several states. And then last but not least, directly impacted Latinx youth leaders, their families, with government representatives to work towards youth justice transformation, building collaboration and diverse participation while centering the leadership of formerly impacted young leaders. It's time, familia. It's time to invest and shift the enormous amounts of funding that has been invested for years in structurally racist, broken, and ineffective systems to finally invest in young people, their families, and community with healing and culturally centered approaches. Gracias.
Thank you, Marcia. We have had several questions come to us, so I'm going to start with our question and answer. If other folks have questions, please put it in the chat box and we'll hopefully be able to get to that this afternoon. We have plenty of time to be able to really open this up. So one of the questions that came to us is, what can I do to help inform my own community? I'd like to start with my family. What are talking points that are important for people to understand that know nothing about this topic? Is there somebody who would like to take a first crack at that question? It's like the Thanksgiving dinner conversation. Go ahead, Chico.
I'll just take a quick stab. I think the video is a really important way for communities to begin the dialogue because it presents a voice, it presents some of the data, it presents the impact of being invisible. Once people begin the dialogue, then the questions begin to unpeel. Reference to the report or other reports or what communities are doing and why they're not doing it, why systems are choosing to not adhere to a federal mandate, why states are not collecting the data. One of the things that Marcia said, which was absolutely critical, is that at the local level, organizations, programs can collect this data. They can still report it and they can ask their superiors, their agencies, their funders, why are these data not important to you and why are you not reporting them? Until we have the ground importance moving up, a top-down mandate has not worked to date. We have to own this and push it forward.
Thanks, Chico. Anyone else want to take a additional perspective on this question?
Let me jump in, and then I'd love to hear either from Bernie or Joanna. You know, that's why it's so important, you know, and on our website, you'll see not only images of our communities, not necessarily our young people, because frankly, we want to protect them only if they want and choose to come out publicly, and not to constantly be asking them about their story, because they are beyond their story. Their story just doesn't define them. Is that I remember in the early days of doing this work, a lot of mothers on the radio would come out and say, you know, my young person is in the system, what should I do? And so on our website, we've made it important to share the stories, and our young people being able to talk about what happened to them, how it happened to them, what was happening in their life as they moved into this period, the adolescent period in their livelihood. That demonstrates that it wasn't like one particular incident that made this happen, that it was sort of a legacy of trauma and disconnectedness, right? So I think that sending people to either our website and or listening to the ways in which we're going to be uplifting via radio to Spanish-speaking communities, to our communities in general, about that this issue beyond immigration, beyond housing, beyond healthcare, like what's the typical 4 major issues that our communities hear about, that this one is right up there with them. So that's what I wanted to share.
Thanks, Marcia.
Yeah, I think one of the most important things for me coming into this realization is we really gotta recognize ourselves, our families, our histories. When we're talking about, you know, internalized racism, you know, a lot of the times, or even our own communities, you know, have that amongst each other, not recognizing, you know, maybe the struggles, the traumas that, you know, we were born into, you know, and it creates a division, separation of understanding of our plight, you know, of what we got to be up against. Some you know, some folks, you know, believe that kids are bad, that kids that are obviously showing symptoms of struggle, of confusion, of you know, showing symptoms that they need love, they need hope, you know, they feel abandoned, you know. It's we need to look at those things and see them for what they are, you know, see them through the lens of our culture. You know, how did our ancestors look and define and deal with these problems? You know, did they throw them away and cast them into a system of incarceration, of locking them up in a box where at this young age, you know, the psychological development is being hindered and is being locked into a box just like their bodies are? What does that do? I experienced that. I know what that did to me. You know, it encloses our imagination. It allows us to believe that this is our future, that this is all we got to look forward to. And again, I believe we need to really dive deep in ourselves and ask those questions about ourselves, you know, and just have those conversations with your family, with your friends, you know, see what the climate is. You know, we see the climate out there and what's going on in the nation right now. There's a lot of upheaval, a lot of confusion, a lot of ancestral rage going on. And we're all being affected by it in one way or another. As a Chicano indígena, all my relatives, you know, the Cubanos, Dominicanos, Puerto Ricanos, South, you know, Central Americans, you know, we're gonna see things differently, but you know, but we do have that commonality of our ancestors. We do have that commonality of lo que es familia,
lo que es, cuidarnos, look out for us, look out for each other. And it's just, we've been interrupted from our culture. And again, I'm very big on cultural identity, on reconciliation, because that's what's helped me, take myself out of that system, that loss of hope. Thank you. I'll say that much.
Thank you, Bernie. That's a lot to unpack, and I think that will give the person who asked this question a good place to start. So thank you all for that. One of the other questions that came in is, how do we collect data on undocumented people? The person who wrote in said that they know so many people who personally are terrified to tell anyone that they're here. So, not only do we have this inaccurate counting and data on people who are acknowledged to be here and in a system, but for people who are not seen at all. Anybody have thoughts about ways to start counting or thinking about doing that?
Frankly, I know, and I happen to work in a county that was close to the border, and we in fact chose not to count youth who were undocumented. And the purpose for that was because at that time, there were still very structurally racist protocols that would have opened up these young people to ICE. And so in many systems around the United States, if they do not have protocols to not call ICE, it would be disastrous to be collecting data about undocumented youth, because some justice systems have a protocol to report that then to ICE and make those people vulnerable to being collected and taken and being deported. Now, there are some very specific things that can be done for undocumented youth, and there's different, and we could put this up on our website, the different organizations that assist with attorneys and or resources for young people that are undocumented sitting in detention facilities around the country. And in fact, JDAI has a wonderful publication about how do you address undocumented youth in the youth justice system. But I have to say, the two populations that when people think about Latino youth in the youth justice system, the two populations that most often comes up are gangs and undocumented youth. And frankly, when you look at the numbers, what numbers we do have, those are the smallest numbers of young people sitting in detention. The majority of young people sitting in detention were young Latinx born in this country. So unless you're along the border or in very large metropolitan cities where there's large numbers of undocumented, like say, for example, unaccompanied minors that came from Central America, there's really not a whole lot of undocumented youth sitting in detention facilities around the country. I hope that's helpful.
Yes, very helpful. Thank you. One other question that came through to us is, what are the kind of, I guess, the solutions to changing the juvenile justice systems across the country? And what can people do in their own departments or organizations to change, to really start looking at how this, they can dismantle these systems internally, but also, build them so that they are correctly kind of gathering this two-part question around race and ethnicity? Chico, Joanna, from the local perspective, any thoughts on this question?
So I want to reemphasize the point that simply because a jurisdiction or a state may not require the data can be collected in a way that can contribute to the efficacy of organizational efforts. as an example, evidence-based practice is a term that is used by many communities. If we don't collect the data, how do we know which evidence-based program can best address these issues? Some people on this call may know that Jóvenes Nobles is a program that is gaining credibility because organizations have used the data to mandate and to help make decisions of the types of programs that can have an effect and impact on the constituents that they serve. So it really is an agency's perspective. It's the individuals who are driving agencies and working within agencies to push for these data to better account for the impact that they're having in their communities.
And conversely, Marcia, did you want to address that?
Yes. Okay, I don't want to hog up all the time either, so I'm going to be brief. We have colleagues that have been doing this work and being extremely effective with Latino youth across this country. From Youth Strong in New York to La Placita in New Mexico to Barrios Unidos and MILPA here in Califas. There's some organizations in Chicago. There's organizations practically in every state that are Latino based. And when you look at the data of where Latinos come from, what neighborhoods, they're usually Latino-based organizations that are in those neighborhoods. I know there's one county in Arizona that, you know, they've had Chicanos por la Causa in their community for years. And does probation actually utilize Chicanos por la Causa? I've never seen it really materialize. And so use the strength of those Latino-based organizations in your community. They're well known and trusted by the community. And so developing programs that work, that are effective, sometimes they are not considered EBPs because of what it takes to evaluate the cost, but they're there. So I just want to say that much.
Thank you, Marcia. And I think conversely, on the other side of this coin is how do we collect data without it later being used to harm our gente? That's one of the other questions that came through. So, you know, we collect it, but how do we make sure and ensure that it doesn't hurt us in the long run?
You know, I think, you know, history has told us that anytime there's resistance, the system will find a way to co-opt the language, try to become seen as the system with the solutions, right? So we can't, I mean, we can't prevent what the system's gonna do, how it's gonna react. The reality is we kind of like I said earlier, we're fighting for our youth, you know, to escape the clutches of incarceration and systemic oppression. And what that's gonna do is you know, it's gonna take people's jobs, it's gonna take people's careers, you know, benefit, all that stuff. So I believe yeah, it's a loaded question. And again, it's the system's gonna react the way it's gonna react. All we can do is continue to push forward, sure-footed, and have the just the healing and the community and the well-being of our youth, you know, at the forefront, and you know, continue that fight, continue that struggle, even and if there's new obstacles that show up, we just gotta deal with those obstacles. I don't really have a specific answer for that, but I just wanted to mention that.
Thanks, Bernie. I'm going to ask Joanna if she wants to weigh in here since she works kind of at this local jurisdiction. Joanna, I don't want to put you on the spot, but do you have thoughts about this? You're on mute.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Sorry. Pertaining to the question of what needs to change in the juvenile justice system, I think that we need to be brave. We now know, I feel like there is no question about whether these systems are racist, you know? And we need to be brave and shut down the juvenile halls. Like, there's no question about it. We just gotta shut them down. We know when it comes to evidence-based practices and the data, we know that these institutions are re-traumatizing our youth and are eventually leading our youth to being young adults incarcerated in, in the system, right? Being adults in the prison system, and that's where our youth are ending up. So we just have to shut them down. There are other alternatives for detention. There are, the Missouri model. We have that here in Santa Clara County, the ranches. Those are more, healing based, group based. They're not, they're based on helping our youth heal from traumatic experiences that they're experiencing in these neighborhoods that are leading them into the system. We need to focus our efforts on that and just shut down the juvenile halls. That's, if you want to know my opinion, that's what it is. And there's just no way around that. We just have to do it. That's it.
I have about three points I want to make real quick.
Sure.
One is, first of all, data drives policy, and community having access to the same data that the system has to make decisions about what policies to change must be shared with community so that we're at the same equal footing to make policy decisions along with the system's players. So that's number one. And that goes to the question about, having the data and being able to be involved in the justice discussions and not cause further harm. It's imperative that community and formerly system impacted young people sit at policy tables to be able to make those decisions and make changes in policy. We have so many wonderful models. Well, no, we have a few models, but so many strategies on how to actually defund, downsize, divest in the system. And I agree with Joanna. We are so close to closing down a couple of systems if they only really utilize those strategies to close down. With COVID, we are even closer to being able to actually actualize the closing down of some of these facilities. Yet, there's always the question about what do we do with all these staff, people that work with counties. So that's a whole nother conversation, but the data is critical and they drive the decisions around policy to downsize how many young people, and then for those young people that will always need that extra, what in the community do we need to develop? And the data is going to help get us there. Without that data, it's very difficult for us to drive the policies we need for what needs to be developed in our communities.
Thank you, Marcia and Joanna. It sounds like the Alianza is going to have our work cut out for us. We have folks who are very interested in doing an online education series around this, so it's something we should definitely think about. I also, let's see, the other question here is, sounds too simple, but we need to push jurisdictions to count. Is it just a matter of effort? The question, is it just a matter of effort, or is there something more here to unpack?
Okay, so I know I'm answering a lot of these questions. I used to work with a youth justice system at a county level. And what we got a lot of pushback here in the state of California. I was involved in authoring a bill, AB 1998, with Assemblywoman Nora Campos. She's no longer Assemblywoman, but the governor signed it. However, it got watered down. It originally read that it was a mandate that all 57 counties in California count Latinos as Latinos. The pushback was that the chiefs of probation stated that without funding to change their information systems, that it was impossible for them to then start counting Latinos. Well, let me tell you, in working at a county jurisdiction, not in the state of California, we had the capacity, the internal capacity to start counting Latinos as Latinos. And I believe that every single county in the state of California actually has the capacity. We just need the political will for these jurisdictions to actually count. And furthermore, we need states to mandate that these counties count us, regardless of whether they have the, what they're saying, that a change in the need of their IT, more funding for more IT changes in order to count us. It is quite simple, but also can be complex with their IT systems, because what we're asking for is a breakdown in every decision point. That's critical. That's critical for us to be able to make the policy changes that are inherent to all the other youth. We get to have that data for all the other youth. Why not have it for Latino youth as well? Thank you.
Marcia, while I have you, and putting on your former JDAI site hat, what can we ask our JDAI colleagues that are on this call today, or who will listen to it after it goes out? What are we asking them specifically to do? Is there a call to action here? Are we looking for partners? What is it? What do we need our JDI folks to help us do today?
We're looking for two states who will sign on, who will say, we are making a commitment to figure out how to do this. Of the 11 most populated Latino states, none of them was identified as being able to model collecting not only at the state level, but also then at all their corresponding counties correctly and accurately data of Latinos across all the systems. Well, the juvenile justice systems across all the institutions, right? Because it's not just probation, it's law enforcement, it's the courts, it's public defenders and prosecutor's office. And so we really do need our leadership in JDAI to help change policy to mandate that Latinos get counted accurately across all the decision points, boys, girls, and SOGI data.
Jessica, if I can just add on to that, I think
absolutely
part of your question drives a very important issue. When JDAI began, there were many people who were skeptical that it would make a difference. What we know is JDAI has made a huge difference through its systematic, data-driven approaches. If there are individuals within this JDAI network who want to take this on to show an added benefit of how this systematic, carefully thought out approach can make a difference in helping the transition of young youth to successful adulthood by keeping them out of systems, that's where the impact can really come. It's trying to find communities that would be willing to move this forward to hold their policy professionals, their systems providers accountable to the mandates that already exist, not that are being created.
Thank you, Chico, for clarifying. We have a couple more questions here, and we're coming down to our last few minutes of our webinar. That hour always goes so fast. So let me try to get to these, and if we can keep our answers to them just a little shorter so we can get to all of them, that would be great. So one question is, data oftentimes catches kind of the negative because there's more of which can be tracked than positives. And so one of the questions is, will we be able to highlight some of the positives that come out of this data collection so we can point to good things that are happening if the data is collected? So does anybody want to just touch on that quickly before we move on to other questions? I think it's a good point, and one that we'll have to keep trying to figure out how we illustrate through our storytelling as well.
Right. I think that there are certain jurisdictions that are doing some excellent work. I want to uplift a couple of jurisdictions in the country. We definitely know that there's a Santa Cruz County here in California who collect data on Latinos and have Latino specific programming. We also know New Mexico, Bernalillo County also does some really excellent work. And then we have some colleagues in Chicago too. And yes, I just put on the chat that we will place some of these organizations that we know that are doing some good work. But you know, it also includes community-based organizations collecting data, right? Because if we're investing money in a community-based organization, we want to know that there's the data that substantiates that these kids are not returning back into detention and that they are not reoffending, that they are showing up in court, that they're have good well-being and are successfully exiting the system. So for all those reasons, I think collecting data is really important. And we do have some examples around the country. We'll make sure to sort of highlight these in our website in some way, shape, or form.
Thanks, Marcia. Thank you
We
all.
only have 1 minute left, actually.
Yeah, so I'm going to actually turn it back over to Shavante to take us out of this webinar. So thank you all for joining us today. It was a really great conversation, and I'm going to turn it over to her.
Thank you all. I just want to say thank you to our panelists, Joanna, Francisco, Marcia, Bernie, and our moderator, Jessica. This webinar is being recorded and it will be posted over on JDAI Connect. So please feel free to go take a look and share it with your colleagues. There were questions that we weren't able to answer, so please feel free to bring those up and continue those conversations over on JDAI Connect. We really do want that information to continue to be shared. And please visit Alianza's website so that you can get more information about the organizations that are doing this work, more information about the report, and to continue moving this conversation forward. Thank you all for joining us today. Have a great day. Thank you.